Throughout history, some families have gained notoriety for their malevolent actions, leaving behind legacies of violence, corruption, and cruelty. These families have often wielded their power and influence in ways that caused immense suffering and tragedy. Here is an exploration of 10 such families whose dark deeds have etched their names into the annals of infamy. 1. The Manson family. The Manson family, led by the deranged Charles Manson, became infamous for a series of brutal murders in 1969. Manson, a charismatic ex-convict, attracted a group of followers, primarily vulnerable young women, whom he manipulated into committing horrific crimes. The most notorious of these was the murder of actress Sharon Tate, who was 8 months pregnant, and 4 others in her home. The Manson family believed they were inciting a race war, which Manson dubbed Helter Skelter. These gruesome acts shocked the world and highlighted the dangers of cults and charismatic leaders who exploit their followers. 2. The Borgias. The Borgia family, originating from Spain but primarily active in Italy, is synonymous with corruption, nepotism, and scandal during the Renaissance. Pope Alexander VI, born Rodrigo Borgia, epitomized the family's notorious reputation. His papacy was marked by extreme corruption, nepotism, and a relentless pursuit of power. His children, Cesare and Lucrezia Borgia, were rumored to engage in various nefarious activities, including murder, incest, and political manipulation. Caesar's ruthless ambition and Lucrezia's alleged involvement in family plots and poisonings contributed to the Borgia legacy of treachery and sin. 3. The Kim dynasty. The Kim dynasty of North Korea, beginning with Kim Il-sung and continuing with his son Kim Jong-il and grandson Kim Jong-un, has ruled the country with an iron fist. Their regime is infamous for severe human rights abuses, including mass starvation, forced labor camps, and extreme political repression. The Kims have maintained power through a cult of personality, brutal crackdowns on dissent, and a pervasive surveillance state. Their authoritarian rule has resulted in the suffering and deaths of millions of North Koreans, making the Kim dynasty one of the most repressive regimes in modern history. 4. The Romanovs. The Romanov dynasty ruled Russia for over 3 centuries, with a legacy marked by autocracy and brutality. Ivan the Terrible, an early Romanov ruler, was notorious for his violent and paranoid reign, which included the massacre of Novgorod and the establishment of the Oprichnina, a secret police force that terrorized the populace. The Romanovs maintained a rigid autocracy, suppressing revolts and opposition through extreme measures. This brutal governance ultimately led to widespread discontent and the Russian Revolution of 1917, which ended their reign and ushered in a new era of turmoil. 5. The Bush family. The Bush family's political dynasty, particularly through the presidencies of George H.W. Bush and George W. Bush, has had significant and often controversial impacts globally. George W. Bush's administration's decision to invade Iraq in 2003, based on the false assertion that Saddam Hussein possessed weapons of mass destruction, led to a prolonged conflict that destabilized the Middle East. The war resulted in significant loss of life and the rise of extremist groups like ISIS. Critics argue that the Bush family's political actions were driven by oil interests and geopolitical strategy, leading to long-term global consequences. 6. The Pahlavi family. The Pahlavi dynasty of Iran, especially under Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi, ruled with increasing authoritarianism, leading to the Iranian Revolution of 1979. The Shah's regime was characterized by human rights abuses, political repression, and the use of a secret police force, SAVAK, to silence dissent. His close ties with Western powers and lavish lifestyle further fueled public discontent. The Pahlavi's oppressive rule and alignment with Western interests contributed to widespread resentment, setting the stage for the rise of the Islamic Republic. 7. The Duvalier family. François Papa Doc Duvalier and his son Jean-Claude Baby Doc Duvalier ruled Haiti with brutality and corruption from 1957 to 1986. Papa Doc used the Tonton Macoute, a secret police force, to enforce his rule through fear and violence, leading to the deaths and disappearances of tens of thousands of Haitians. Baby Doc continued his father's legacy of oppression and plundered the country's wealth, leading to severe economic decline. The Duvalier era is remembered as one of Haiti's darkest periods, marked by fear, repression, and economic devastation. 8. The Escobar family. Pablo Escobar, the notorious Colombian drug lord, led the Medellin cartel and amassed immense wealth through the illegal drug trade. Escobar's operations resulted in the deaths of thousands, including law enforcement officers, politicians, and civilians caught in the crossfire of cartel violence. His family, including his brother Roberto Escobar, played roles in his criminal empire. Despite attempts to rehabilitate their image, the Escobar's legacy is indelibly linked to narco-terrorism and violence. Pablo Escobar's reign of terror left a lasting impact on Colombia and the global fight against drugs. 9. The Habsburgs. The Habsburg family, one of the most influential royal houses in Europe, engaged in ruthless political maneuvers to maintain their power. Their rule was characterized by constant wars, political intrigue, and the oppression of various ethnic groups within their vast empire. The Habsburgs' relentless pursuit of power led to significant bloodshed, including the 30 Years' War, which devastated much of Europe. Their legacy is one of political manipulation, strict hierarchical control, and the enforcement of authoritarian rule across their territories. 10. The Bin Laden family. The Bin Laden family, particularly Osama bin Laden, became infamous for their association with global terrorism. Osama bin Laden, the mastermind behind the September 11, 2001, terrorist attacks, led al-Qaeda and orchestrated numerous acts of terror that resulted in the deaths of thousands. The bin Laden family's wealth and connections provided the resources and networks that supported Osama's terrorist activities. While other family members have distanced themselves from him, the bin Laden name remains synonymous with extremism and global terror. Conclusion. The dark legacies of these families serve as a stark reminder of how power, corruption, and violence can devastate societies and leave a lasting impact on history. Whether through political oppression, criminal empires, or acts of terror, the actions of these families have had profound and often tragic consequences. Their stories highlight the importance of vigilance, accountability, and justice in preventing the rise and perpetuation of such malevolence. Throughout history, some families have gained notoriety for their malevolent actions, leaving behind legacies of violence, corruption, and cruelty. Throughout history, some families have gained notoriety for their malevolent actions, leaving behind legacies of violence, corruption, and cruelty. Throughout history, some families have gained notoriety for their malevolent actions, leaving behind legacies of violence, corruption, and cruelty. Throughout history, some families have gained notoriety for their malevolent actions, leaving behind legacies of violence, corruption, and cruelty. Throughout history, some families have gained notoriety for their malevolent actions, leaving behind legacies of violence, corruption, and cruelty. Throughout history, some families have gained notoriety for their malevolent actions, leaving behind legacies of violence, corruption, and cruelty. Throughout history, some families have gained notoriety for their malevolent actions, leaving behind legacies of violence, corruption, and cruelty. These families have often wielded their power and influence. Throughout history, some families have gained notoriety for their malevolent actions, leaving behind legacies of violence, corruption, and cruelty. Throughout history, some families have gained notoriety for their malevolent actions, leaving behind legacies of violence, corruption, and cruelty. Throughout history, some families have gained notoriety for their malevolent actions, leaving behind legacies of violence, corruption, and cruelty. Throughout history, some families have gained notoriety for their malevolent actions, leaving behind legacies of violence, corruption, and cruelty. These families. Throughout history, some families have gained notoriety for their malevolent actions, leaving behind legacies of violence, corruption, and cruelty. Throughout history, some families have gained notoriety for their malevolent actions, leaving behind legacies of violence, corruption, and cruelty.